Welcome again and good evening to Star of the North Retreat House. I'm Lucy Leduc, the Executive Director for Star of the North, and we're so honored and deeply privileged to be partnering with Mouvement, Laudato Movement Canada, and part of an international organization. And Agnes Richards is the Executive Director, and you see her here on the screen. And we're just so grateful to be working with you, Agnes, on this ritual. And we thank again Sister Maria Angel for preparing this ritual, a Nurse Line of Jesus that works here at the Star, and for Clint, who has done the technology and is providing a video for us. And we're going to have a wonderful evening here. Okay, and so we'll begin. Earth, water, air, fire are the four elements recognized as the foundations of life, both in ancient Greece and for indigenous peoples since time immemorial. Laudato Si number 2, we have forgotten that we ourselves are dust of the earth. Our very bodies are made up of her elements. We breathe her air, and we receive life and refreshment from her water. Earth, Mother Earth, we recognize the land that welcomes us, which is Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground and home of the First Nations, including the treaty signatories Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney, and Cree Iroquois, as well as other Indigenous peoples, especially the Métis, who settled St. Albert along the river and on this hill, and the Blood and Blackfoot, who occupied this land. We're committed to the TRC calls to action and to working alongside Indigenous peoples for healing, truth, and reconciliation. The earth welcomes us, nourishes us, and is home to a great diversity of creatures. May we honor Mother Earth by being welcoming to one another and living our existence in an attitude of building a better world for all. And so we place soil in the center of beauty, and Clint will just demonstrate, and then we'll invite those in the room to also participate. Water, God's gift of love, which he gives unconditionally and freely to us all. Water is the first and fundamental basic human right, a condition for the enjoyment of other rights. Its central role in life deserves to be honored, and the first way to do so is to fight for access to clean water for all human beings. We water the soil of the center of beauty. Fire, energy present in the center of life. The center of the planet is extremely hot. We can say that the core of the planet is fire. The fire that is the sun activates life every day. With fire, with heat, we cook, that human act that makes us co-creators with God. And fire is not possible without oxygen. Air, ally of fire, the element that envelops everything on the surface of the earth, connects us and gives us life. We fill our lungs with the same shared breath that circulates through all living beings and connects us to the cosmos. Through it, we are physically and chemically connected to all life and the lives of fellow brother and sister humans. Sound is also carried through it, by which we communicate. As a sign of gratitude for the air that gives life to us all, we're just going to breathe into our hands and offer it out as a gesture of wanting to offer the same life we receive to the rest of creation.
This year's theme for the season of creation is listen to the voice of creation. We need to listen to the voices of those suffering the impacts of climate change, the people who hold ancient wisdom on how to live with gratitude within the limits of the earth, the voices of a diminishing diversity of species. These are the voices of the earth. We ask ourselves, what voices do we need to hear? Together, we will name these voices, writing them on red paper before placing them around the center of beauty. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful sharing. These truly are voices that we need to hear. The symbol of the burning bush is the symbol of the season of creation for this year. And so I'm just gonna place some sticks around the candle as a symbol of the season of creation 2022. In Exodus, we read, I have heard your cry, says Yahweh. I know your sufferings. Come now, I will send you. I will be with you. Burning bush is the symbol of the season of creation. Today, the prevalence of unusually intense fires is a sign of the devastating effects of climate change on the most vulnerable. Creation screams as forests crackle. Animals flee and people are forced to migrate due to the fire of injustice. In contrast, the fire that called to Moses as he tended the flock on Mount Horeb did not consume or destroy the bush. This flame of the Spirit revealed the presence of God. This sacred fire affirmed that God heard the cries of all who suffer and promised to be with us as we followed in faith our deliverance from injustice. In this season of creation, this symbol of the Spirit of God calls us to listen to the voice of creation. Creation speaks to us eloquently of God's glory, but we do not contemplate it. We do not listen to it. Perhaps it is our attitudes that need conversion. The perspective we need to recover is to see creation as a temple, as a sacred place, as holy ground. The bush contrasts the fire of so many unnatural fires that aggravate the climate crisis with the sign of fire as the light of the Holy Spirit that unites Christians.
Burning bush you are, glowing and endless love, living in your midst, to live by you, to be alive in you. This fire does not consume the essence of every person. You show me yourself in creation, in all of the beauty that speaks and cries out thee. That you are love, in a flower, in the waves of the sea, in the dawn, in the song of a swan, in a kiss of a child to his mother, in the farewell of a dying father. You are love, in a man who climbs the slope, in a woman earth, water, air, and fire. Earth, water, air, and fire. Let's take off our shoes in front of so much love. We need only to listen to the beautiful, the good, the true that lies around us. For it's love in the flower, in the waves of the sea, in the dawn, in the song of a swan, in a kiss of a child to his mother, in the farewell of a dying father. It's love in a man who climbs the slope, in a woman who chooses his life, in a star bursting with light, in forgiveness the cause pain. It's love in the man who climbs the slope, in a woman who chooses his life, in a star bursting with light, in forgiveness the cause pain. You are earth, water, air, and fire. Earth, water, air, and fire.
At a time when climate change is revealing its devastating effects, there are people and collectives that nourish hope with their prophetic commitment. The fire of love for creation as sacred burns within them. Now again, we pause to write the names of peoples and groups that are committed to the care of creation on a piece of green paper. And these we will place around the center of beauty. And as before, those participating on Zoom, if you put your comments in the chat box, I will read them out for everyone in the room. So while people in the room are thinking, I have a few that's come in the chat. Linda mentions Earth Regenerators. Chrissia mentions the United Nations. The Indigenous protected and conserved areas, groups of people working. Linda mentions Mouvement, Laudato Si movement. Okay, I will continue then. To observe nature, to study how to harmonize our actions with hers in order to grow food is in itself an act of prayer, because it is to harmonize our being with that of God. In times of consumerism, and we also consume nature, and of acceleration today, to cultivate a garden is to revalue our sacred ties with nature, which gives us everything generously. Our celebration of the season of creation will take place around the organic garden of Star of the North, an old dream of its director, Lucy Leduc, made possible thanks to the knowledge and hard work of Clint Porritt, and with the unconditional support and effective help of Bishop Sylvain Lavoie. We will go out to the garden later, but throughout this ritual, we will recreate it in this room in order to let ourselves be guided by it.
Tonight, we're going to look at 7 phases of development in a organic garden based on a deep mulch, no-till method. That's the method we use here at Star Garden. And the 7 phases are honoring the soil, watering, layering cardboard and organic materials, planting, tending, and harvesting. So to begin, everything begins with honoring and preparing the soil. So we start with a patch of ground, and the condition of this ground doesn't matter. It could be a weedy patch, or it could be a lawn or a piece of sod, such as this. What's important, for plants to grow, obviously, is access to sunlight, and not planting in a slough or someplace where there's not good drainage. But beyond that, you can plant pretty much on top of anything. And we honor the soil, we honor this area by recognizing that there's all sorts of things already happening in this patch of soil. Beneath the surface, there's a complicated structure. There's vast microbial networks and microorganisms working in this patch of soil. And those networks are capturing carbon out of the air. So they're doing us a favor. Those networks are adding nutrients that help the plants grow. Those networks are helping retain moisture for plants to grow. But we also recognize that each piece of land has a deep history, as we've already made mention in our land acknowledgement this morning. There's history here, history that goes beyond our tiny piece of time here on this earth as human beings. It goes even further back than that. We honor the soil in this area, not by tilling or cutting the soil, by doing violence to it in that way. Because in doing so, we disturb these important connections, the work that's happening already underneath the soil. We don't want to disturb these underground communities in that way. And so through this process of honoring the soil, of not cutting into it, we make peace with the earth, feeding it without violence and watching it thrive into new life.
Having a good base, a good foundation, is the key to a fulfilling life. You cannot love what you do not contemplate. Contemplation is the basis of a spirituality of integral ecology. Integral ecology includes the need to promote personal, social, and ecological harmony, similar to how we maintain the existing soil when planting a no-till garden. We consider our place in the world from a holistic perspective that builds on what is already present. Only when we're aware of how our lifestyle damages our common home can we initiate a change of life. In other words, only when we recognize how our way of producing, trading, consuming, and disposing affects the life of the planet are we then in a position to modify such practices and lifestyles. An integral conversion requires both a profound change of heart expressed in personal habits, and a profound structural change expressed in social habits, laws, and economic programs. For this conversion, both personal and collective, we need to find deep motivations. The proposal of Laudato Si is to turn the cultural riches of peoples to spirituality. Laudato Si number 63. Given the complexity of the ecological crisis and its multiple causes, we need to realize that the solutions will not emerge from just one way of interpreting and transforming reality. Respect must also be shown for the various cultural riches of different peoples, their art and poetry, their interior life and spirituality. We ought to notice how in healthy, organic soil, as in humans, we have the combination of the four elements: earth, water, air, sun, and fire.
It's a beautiful thing to think that in holding 1 tablespoon of dirt, of healthy soil in your hand, you're in essence holding a whole world in your hands. There's about 8 billion microorganisms and fungi and bacteria that are in a tablespoon of dirt. Just invite just the first couple of participants to come and put a tablespoon of organic soil here on this sod, just as a sign of awe at the richness of this soil that is under our feet. So honoring the earth. Step number 2 is water, is soaking the earth. At the beginning of this process, we soak the ground, but also all throughout this process, as we begin to add layers, we're soaking those layers. And the excess of water on this patch of soil will cause rot to happen. And rot is essentially what we do when we're composting. We're allowing things to decay, to break down. And as they break down, because of that rot that's happening with the excess moisture, nutrients are being released. As you boil things in a pot to make a soup, the nutrients are released and the flavors are released from the vegetables and the meat into the soup. It's the same thing that's happening here. So we add the water so that what's rotting underneath becomes nourishment and nutrients for the plants that will eventually be planted. Laudato Si. Access to safe, drinkable water is a basic and universal human right, since it is essential to human survival, and as such, is a condition for the exercise of other human rights. Our world has a grave social debt toward the poor who lack access to drinking water because they are denied the right to a life consistent with their inalienable dignity. In the world, 2.1 billion people survive without access to drinking water at home. There are Indigenous reserves throughout Canada without drinking water. This is totally unjust. And now I'm going to turn it over to Angus to say a few things about clean drinking water in Blue communities.
In Canada, a country with the world's largest quantity of fresh water, it is a shame that many Indigenous communities do not have clean water for their own use because of colonial constructs and systemic environmental racism that has allowed the poisoning of clean water by industrial activities. One such area is the Grassy Narrows First Nation in Northwest Ontario. In the 1960s and 70s, a large pulp and paper mill in Dryden, Ontario, just north of Grassy Narrows, dumped 9,000 kilograms of mercury into the English Wobegon River. And now, not only is the river highly contaminated, but so are the bodies of the Indigenous families who live along that waterway. They suffer multiple physical and mental problems, and their lives and culture of their community has been severely impacted. Another area seriously affected by water contamination due to industry is the Athabasca River system in Alberta, threatened by leaking toxins from tar sands extraction tailing ponds. The impacts directly affect the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation and Fort McKay and Fort McMurray Métis communities. In 2006, Dr. John O'Connor raised concerns about disproportionately high rates of cancer in Fort Chipewyan, Alberta, believing that nearby oil sands sites may have played a role. Vindicated by scientific research, and after being professionally reprimanded, Dr. O'Connor said in 2009, "Put the brakes on, slow down, enforce environmental laws. Get rid of the tailings ponds, do things in a clean fashion, and just do the right thing by Fort Chip." After receiving the Peter Bryce Prize for Whistleblowing from the Ryerson University Center for Free Expression last year, O'Connor again called for governments to act. Every day that passes and there's no action taken is more and more an indictment on the federal and provincial governments. Similarly, on Canada's east coast, the Pictou Landing First Nation, alongside Boat Harbour in Nova Scotia, is considered to be one of Nova Scotia's worst cases of environmental racism. Boat Harbour has become polluted with dioxins, furans, chloride, mercury, and other toxic heavy metals from the effluent of a pulp and paper mill opened in the 1960s. Boat Harbour is now undergoing a federal environmental assessment, and cleanup was expected to begin in 2021. There is much that families and individuals can do to examine their own relationship with water. A very easy first step is to reflect on your use of bottled water. Be mindful of the water you consume. Avoid the waste of single-use bottles of water that are not proven to be better for your health, but only play into our desire for convenient consumption. Respect the water that comes from your tap, and as you use it, be thankful for the systems in play that deliver clean, healthy water to your home for your personal use. Carry tap water with you for drinking. Consider saving water for multiple uses, like washing vegetables first and then watering your houseplants. Water from boiled foods can be frozen and eventually become soup broth. Extend these ideas to another liquid many of us enjoy: coffee. In your thankfulness, be mindful that others struggle for the basics we take for granted, and join your voice to those advocating for safe, clean water for everyone. Now we will invite the participants in the room, to bring water to the soil and sprinkle droplets where Clint will direct you to do that. And at the same time, as a sign of commitment to advocate for drinkable water for everyone. For those at home, you're invited, if you have nearby a house plant that you can water.
So maybe we'll just have just the folks in the back row to come up for this one and sprinkle some water on the sod. You just need to get your fingertips wet. We don't have to soak this like we would if we were outside. We honor the soil, the water, the soil. And the next stage of this process is something made by humans, and it's cardboard or newspaper. At this stage in the process, we cover the wet earth with cardboard, standard non-glossy cardboard, and this traps the moisture in underneath the cardboard, and that allows this fermentation, this rotting, this composting process to be accelerated. Weeds and grass beneath this layer will rot in the dark because there's no access to sunlight. Weed seeds, most of them, will slip into dormancy. And as the root systems of the existing plants here begin to rot and break down, they leave behind these small tunnels where the root used to be. And these small tunnels, the water can penetrate into these tunnels more easily, and this hard sod starts to become soft soil because now there are these networks that are able to bring water deeper into the earth. So as the soil softens, these layers begin to retain the soil. This will become essentially a huge sponge that holds and retains the soil. And in a month or two, there won't be any trace of this cardboard. It'll all be broken down. It will become soil and recycled back into the natural process.
How much we can do with recyclable material. Laudato Si advises us about the throwaway culture. The 6 R's: reduce, recycle, reuse, repair, refuse waste to begin with. Repurpose ought to be part of our daily habits. Laudato Si, these problems are closely linked to a throwaway culture which affects the excluded just as it quickly reduces things to rubbish. To cite one example, most of the paper we produce is thrown away and not recycled. It is hard for us to accept that the way natural ecosystems work is exemplary. Plants synthesize nutrients, which feed herbivores. These in turn become food for carnivores, which produce significant quantities of organic waste, which give rise to new generations of plants. But our industrial system, at the end of its cycle of production and consumption, has not developed the capacity to absorb and reuse waste and byproducts. We've not yet managed to adopt a circular model of production capable of preserving resources for present and future generations, while limiting as much as possible the use of non-renewable resources, moderating their consumption, maximizing their efficient use, reusing, and recycling them. Fratelli Tutti. In some closed and monochrome economic approaches, for example, there seems to be no place for popular movements that unite the unemployed, temporary and informal workers, and many others who do not easily find a place in existing structures. Yet those movements manage various forms of popular economy and of community production. What is needed is a model of social, political and economic participation that can include popular movements and invigorate local, national, and international governing structures with that torrent of moral energy that springs from including the excluded in the building of a common destiny. Pope Francis, in his meetings with popular movements, praises the creativity and effort of so many groups that find in recycling, in what others throw away, a way to earn a decent income. Laudato Si puts a lot of emphasis on this economic dimension. So we invite one in-house participant to place a piece of cardboard on the wet soil we've just watered as a sign of commitment to produce less waste.
I'm going to invite Sylvan up to do this because he's been very active in laying cardboard and bringing cardboard to the star. So you have the honor of covering up our sod here with this.
Stealing cardboard from merchants in the city with their permission.
So we honor the soil, we water the soil, we cover the soil with cardboard or newspaper. And now we come to a fun part of this project as we begin to layer the soil with different organic components.
I'm sorry, Clint.
Yeah.
I had some slides to go with cardboard, if that's all right.
Go ahead, sorry.
No worries, no worries.
She's going to talk about the economy of Francis.
Okay, here we go. The Our use of cardboard in the garden has very practical applications, as Clint explained. It is also an excellent use for what is often considered waste. By repurposing the cardboard, especially in a manner that captures its inherent carbon content for use in the soil, it is a perfect metaphor for a reciprocal or circular economy. In the Vatican document, Journeying Towards Care for Our Common Home, a circular economy is described as an alternative to the traditional linear economy, where producing, using, throwing away is prevalent. In a circular economy, resources are not excessively exploited for production, but are kept in use for as long as possible, obtaining maximum value and recovering products and materials at the end of each life cycle. The transition to a circular economy excuse me, would involve a new way of looking at the relationships between markets, between consumers and natural resources, making obsolete the very concept of refuse, since everything is of value. In economic terms, it would mean ensuring efficiency and effectiveness in the way we manage input and output, and in the way we strengthen the connections between producers and consumers, between growth and sustainability, between people and the planet. The underlying principle of the donut economy echoes Pope Francis and indigenous knowledge in recognizing that everything is connected. The economy does not stand alone or outside of the natural sustainable boundaries of ecological systems. Neither can it operate successfully beyond what is needed for optimal human needs and rights so that everyone can thrive. The sought after sweet spot is the economic model is the green circle in the center of this image that respects both planetary and human boundaries. This image of the donut economy illustrates where humanity is currently overshooting the planetary boundaries. This is the red sections around the outside. And the hole at the donut center reveals the proportion of people worldwide falling short on life's essentials. such as food, water, healthcare, and political freedom of expression. And a big part of humanity's challenge is to get everyone out of that hole. At the same time, however, we cannot afford to be overshooting the donut's outer crust if we are to safeguard Earth's living, life-giving systems, such as a stable climate, healthy oceans, and a protective ozone layer, on which all our well-being fundamentally depends. From September 22nd to 24th this year, over 1,000 young people from all over the world will meet with the Holy Father and sign a pact for a new economy. The Holy Father is keen to be present and meet young economists, entrepreneurs, and change makers from around the world who've been working towards the economy of Francesco for the last 3 years. Economy of Francesco is a process called for by the Pope himself to lay foundations for a new economy, one that is more just, equitable, and fraternal. There is a Canadian group of youth meeting October 2nd in Montreal. The Mouvement, Laudato Movement Canada will do our best to help interested persons connect with these young people. Again, we see that positive action is also happening other places in Canada. The Development and Peace 2021-22 campaign, much of it will be continued into the next year, calls for government policymakers to put people and planet first when making decisions here at home and about how Canadian companies operate around the world. Their educational materials outline global economic realities and how people are impacted by the corporate power of our Canadian companies. They also ask for our participation in highlighting these concerns with our political leaders. In November of 2018, through the Canadian Council of Ministers for the Environment, the federal and provincial and territorial governments adopted the Canadian-wide strategy on zero plastic waste and an action plan to implement that strategy. The plan, developed in 2 phases, sets out tangible actions and clear timelines to better prevent, reduce, reuse, recover, capture, and clean up plastic waste and pollution in Canada. They can always use more encouragement. Environmental Defense, an environmental advocacy NGO, invites us to encourage our political leaders to increase their efforts in making zero plastic waste by 2030 an attainable goal. The Canadian Plastics Pact is an industry-based organization that unites diverse leaders and experts in the national plastics value chains to collaborate and rethink the way we design, use, and reuse plastic packaging, and to realize a circular economy for plastic in Canada. At the end of our presentation and in early next week, you'll receive a package with all of these links that you'll be able to investigate yourself if you would like to at another time.
So stage number 4 is the layering of organic materials. And in terms of organic materials, it could be compost, wood chips, straw, grass clipping, leaves. Instead of packing these items into plastic bags and sending them off to the landfill where they may or may not break down, depending how trapped they are in that plastic bag. I have a friend who's a professor at NAIT, an environmental professor at NAIT, and they found they did experiments putting a head of cabbage in a plastic bag and burying it in the ground. And it was incredible how that head of cabbage wouldn't break down inside this airtight plastic bag. It kind of molded, but it was still there. And when they dug it up years later, you could still make out the cabbage because that's what plastic does. So instead of burying this stuff in a landfill, we're repurposing it so that it becomes fertilizer, nutrients for our garden, because this is nutrient-rich material. Another way of talking about deep mulch gardening would be forest floor gardening. Think of a forest, the way a forest nurtures the undergrowth and underneath the trees. Branches fall off and they break down and become soil. Animals and plants die. And what do they break down? They become soil. And every autumn, the leaves fall on top and blanket everything. It becomes soil. If you walk into a forest and you stick your hand in without very much digging, you'll find that your hand will go down 6 to 8 inches into the softness of the forest floor, and you'll find moisture there, and you'll find this softness in which all of the plants are growing in, and that's what we're looking for as we're recreating this type of a forest floor, a bed of composting materials as we layer these items.
Nature regenerates itself, takes advantage of its cycles. For example, the compost from Star of the North's kitchen feeds the garden. We must also reacquaint ourselves with the abundance of life offered in the natural world, and that in its wholeness, it is already complete and functioning well without extreme human intervention and interference, such as chemical pesticides, herbicides, chemical fertilizers, and monocrop farming. So I invite Agnes to speak to us on biodiversity and the COP15 in Montreal.
Soil, leaves, grass, and compost, with all of their partnering organisms, contribute valuable services to our healthy garden, just as the miraculous diversity of insects, plants, birds, fish, and animals contribute to a healthy planet for us to thrive. The integrity of living soil and the composting material we add needs to be protected, kept whole, and as richly biodiverse as possible. All too often, biodiversity is erased to make way for large-scale monocrops. Land is torn up and polluted to mine minerals. Precious arable farmland is given over to many square kilometers of single-family dwellings. In December this year in Montreal, Montreal will host the next United Nations Conference of the Parties for Biodiversity, COP15. In advance of that event, Pope Francis pleads for these policies to be adopted by governments around the world to protect biodiversity. He says, in order to halt the further collapse of biodiversity, our God-given network of life, let us pray and urge nations to reach agreement on 4 key principles. To construct a clear ethical basis for the changes needed to save biodiversity. To combat the loss of biodiversity, to support conservation and cooperation, and to satisfy people's needs in a sustainable way. To promote global solidarity in light of the fact that biodiversity is a global common good, demanding a shared commitment. And 4, to give priority to people in situations of vulnerability, including those most affected by the loss of biodiversity, such as Indigenous peoples, the elderly, and the young. According to the organization Global Safety Net, across the globe, Indigenous communities are quite literally our last line of defense to save the biosphere upon which we all depend. Their land stewardship, moral principles around leadership and relationship with the surrounding ecosystems is what we need to learn from and act upon. Supporting Indigenous-led organizations is especially important as they could help drive rapid conservation of both land and sea. Scientist Eric Dinnerstein with the Global Safety Net said in a Guardian article, "We found that addressing Indigenous land claims, upholding existing land tenure rights, and resourcing programs on Indigenous managed lands will help achieve biodiversity objectives." In Canada, positive change, again, I can say, is happening. The Nature Conservancy of Canada has multiple programs to conserve and restore natural spaces through which ecosystem restoration is making a difference for species at risk, the fight against biodiversity loss, and safeguarding the benefits that nature provides for people. In Guelph, Ontario, the Ignatius Jesuit Centre is committed to growing, over the next 500 years, an old growth forest using the concept of holistic restoration. An exciting new initiative through the Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas Project invites everyone's participation in a knowledge basket. It is a digital space created to honor, celebrate, and catalyze Indigenous-led conservation pathways in Canada, and including the Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas. Registration is encouraged through the website on this slide. And organizations like Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, also known as CPAWS, is a Canadian charity dedicated to the protection of public land, freshwater, and oceans, and has a strong national and regional presence across the country, working in a way that respects the sovereignty and leadership of Indigenous nations. They are focused on conserving nature to respond to the dual crises of accelerated biodiversity loss and climate change. We can support the shift to protect wilderness areas and partnerships that combine Indigenous knowledge and skill with federal government programs.
Okay, we'll invite our last three participants here to come on up. And we're going to layer some of this organic material over our little garden in recognition of the simplicity of these natural cycles that breed such diversity and provide for new life. The order doesn't matter so much, but in nature, the heaviest materials sink to the bottom. So usually the wood chip would kind of go on the bottom. That's going to take the longest to break down. And then the lighter materials would go next. But besides, I use the metaphor of the forest floor gardening. A more contemporary name that's being used, and you've heard of this, is lasagna gardening. We're building a natural lasagna. So there's books on lasagna gardening. They're just talking about deep mulch gardening. Oh, yes. So if I was doing this outside, I would actually make a pile of all these three things, the straw and the leaves and the grass, and I'd mix them up a little bit with a pitchfork, and that would help, particularly so the grass and leaves don't get too compacted. We want that air to be in there as well, the soil moist. But that's a personal preference. Our star garden, which we're going to visit in just a few minutes, incorporated in our 4 plots that we have right now, 700 bags, large bags of leaves and grass clippings, and 20 bales of straw. And I'm not sure how many wood chips, but I think 3 or 4 large loads of wood chips.
All of which was free.
Yes.
Compost was.
Yeah, we did actually add some compost this year as well, which we had to pay just for the transportation of, but the compost itself is free. So here we have our beautiful garden, and if we were doing this process in the fall, We could cover this with a tarp, so stuff doesn't blow away if we want, or we could throw some heavier stuff on top, and over fall, winter, and into spring, this is going to break down and become soil that we can plant in. It's not going to look like this. It's going to look quite woody and fibrous, but you can still plant in that perfectly fine, just like a forest plants itself. We're on to step number 5, which is planting seeds. And so we would plant into this, like I said, in the spring, like we did this spring, we planted right into this pile. And all of us know that if we let our gardens go wild, if we let things go to seed, as we say, they would replant themselves. In the spring, we would still have plants coming up. It just probably wouldn't be a neat rows. It would be kind of all over the place. But plants reseed themselves. And if we're careful, we can harvest seeds in the fall that we can replant in the spring. And just like in a forest, most seeds can actually just sit on top of the soil. They don't even have to be buried, or they can just be lightly covered, or they can just be pushed in just with a fingertip. It doesn't need to be too deep. One of the main arguments for covering seeds is just so you keep the birds from eating your seed. But in the forest, things plant themselves quite naturally without any digging or trenching or anything like that. So before moving further into this phase, those of us in the room are going to go on a little field trip out to the Star Garden, and we'll just spend about 10 minutes out there. I'll show you around a little bit.
Hey, welcome to Star Garden. I'm just going to give you a little tour of what we've got going out here this year. This is our first year of Star Garden, and with plans to develop it over the next 3. You can see here we've got 3 big beds of tomatoes and carrots. So tomatoes and carrots have a symbiotic relationship with one another. They're friendly and friends to one another, so that's why they're planted together. You'll notice that these tomatoes here are taller than me, so they're about over 6 feet tall. So it's pretty great tomato production this year. We've got some peas that have already been harvested, and we've got a beautiful plot here of cucumbers, Mercury cucumbers. And that's an absolutely delicious variety. This is plot number 2, and we've got kind of leafy greens growing here, kale and Swiss chard and lettuce and beets. Here we have a herb garden, so you can see basil and parsley and sage and thyme. We've got cabbages under this shade cover, and we got a lot of nice big pumpkins growing here, getting ready. So those should start oranging up in the next couple weeks or so. And this will be an asparagus bed. We planted asparagus from seed, and over the next 2 to 3 years, it'll be taller than me. Okay, we'll move on to the next plot here. So this center strip between the gardens is a micro orchard, which is still in development. We've got pears, saskatoons, choke cherries, and other fruits growing here, and we'll be adding different species as we go along. This big plot here is mostly potatoes, and on this side again we have more potatoes, lots of potatoes this year. A couple different varieties of onion. And here we have 2 beds of the Three Sisters. So Three Sisters is an indigenous way of planting, of interplanting. So the idea there is planting corn, pole beans, and squash or some type of pumpkin climbing vine together. Again, this is a symbiotic relationship between those 3 varieties. The corn grows tallest first, and the pole beans are able to use the corn to grow up the stalk twirl around the stalks, so they use the corn as a ladder so they can grow nice and tall. The squash plants at the bottom here, they love the shade, so they're at the bottom here, and they're also adding all sorts of nitrogen and other necessary nutrients to the soil that help the beans and the corn grow. So we're hoping for a good corn crop this year. We got some nice ears of corn growing here. We've harvested a lot of beans already from these two beds this summer. And the butternut squash will be still a couple weeks away before we can start harvesting that. So I'm just going to show you quickly how the beds are built. So this is called, as we've been talking about, you know, in our ritual here today, we've been talking about the ways of building a deep mulch no-till garden. So these are some of the new plots that are just in development. We had a volunteer crew out just last week to help us get them started. And so none of the soil is overturned. There's no digging at all. We don't need shovels for this type of gardening at all. We just take cardboard and we spray it down. We make it nice and wet, and we lay it right on top of the grass. On top of the grass, we bring in wood chip. In most cities, you can get wood chip for free from the city. And so we get our wood chip for free, and that goes on top of the cardboard. On top of the wood chip, and you can add water between every layer. That's a good thing while you're building it, because this is going to become a big sponge that retains moisture, and that moisture is going to rot this grass that's underneath and turn it into soil, but it's also going to provide moisture for your seeds. On top of this, you're just going to put any mulch organic material. So what we've used is straw, we've used leaves, we use grass clippings. Those three things are great. You know, any type of organic material that's going to break down, and you pile that up, and you want it to be about 8 inches deep. So all of these beds here that we're looking at, these all started like this. They started with the layer of cardboard, which is long gone. It's already disintegrated. And then a layer of wood chip. You can see some wood chip here. And then 6 inches, 7 inches of grass and leaves and straw. And that's what makes up your garden bed. And you plant your seeds right into that mulch pile. And all the stuff is breaking down, decomposing throughout the season, and releasing all the nutrients, you know, as it breaks down that feed your plant. So no fertilizer needed, no water needed, because this big sponge is holding all the water. No digging needed. And lastly, limited weeding needed. So as your plants start to grow, you take more mulch, and in order to keep the weeds back, you see there's a little dandelion here, you just smother those weeds in mulch. And so you're always adding mulch through the summer. You're adding mulch around your plants so they can trap the moisture, so they can kill the weeds, so very little weeding as well. That's kind of the basic theory behind no-till deep mulch gardening. So Star Garden, the origins of this is this is a connection to creation, a connection to the land. It's about being responsible with what we've been given as God's creatures, and so to develop this land responsibly and then use it for the blessing of the common good. So the idea behind the garden as a cooperative or a food security garden is that we'll gather a community of people who are interested in gardening, but also are in need of fresh produce, and in coming together in community, we can learn from one another in terms of gardening skills, but also we can harvest food for those in need. Obviously, at a time when food prices are quite high and there's a lot of need, there are all sorts of communities we can reach out to with our produce. So far we've been working with organizations such as the Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society in Edmonton, which works with Indigenous folks, Ukrainian refugees and refugees from other areas of the world that are here in Canada and in need of fresh produce. St. Vincent de Paul, the St. Albert Food Bank. So different organizations and individuals and families can come here and be part of this larger project as we create food and are able to bless one another with the harvest. So thanks again for being a part of this tour and a part of this ritual today. We'd love to see you out here in the garden sometime. So do drop by and say hi, and thank you for your continued support of the work of Star of the North.
Pope Francis, during his visit to Canada, in his homily at Commonwealth Stadium, clearly questioned us on what kind of world we want to leave the next generations. In the fog of forgetfulness that overshadows our turbulent times, it is essential, brothers and sisters, to take care of our roots, to pray for and with our forebears, to dedicate time to remember and guard their legacy. This is how a family tree grows. This is how the future is built. What do we want to do with ourselves? The grandparents who went before, the elderly who had dreams and hopes for us and made great sacrifices for us, ask an essential question: what kind of society do we want to build? We received so much from the hands of those who preceded us. What do we in turn want to bequeath to those who come after us? Brothers and sisters, this also applies to us. Those who preceded us have passed on to us a passion, a strength, and a yearning, a flame that it is up to us to reignite. It is not a matter of preserving ashes, but of rekindling the fire that lay lit. Our grandparents and our elders wanted to see a more just, fraternal, and solidary world, and they fought to give us a future. Now it is up to us not to let them down. It is up to us to take on the tradition received, because that tradition is the living faith of our dead. So I turn to Agnes now, who has a moment about preparing for the needs of the future generations.
Let's reflect on the wealth that we have accumulated, how we protect it, and expect that our wealth will grow and satisfy our needs as we move into our older years. Do the methods we use to save and grow that wealth also contribute to a healthy and sustainable future? It is said that those living now are the first generations to truly understand our impacts on all of creation. And we are also the last generations with the ability to meaningfully change our ways to provide a livable future for those who follow us. Again, in the Vatican document, Journeying Towards Care of Our Common Home, it is noted that investors can encourage positive change in various sectors of the economy. This is the case when they decide not to invest in companies that fail to meet certain standards around human rights, child labor, environmental concerns, and so forth. Banks are proposing to individual citizens investment options that meet the same standards. And listed companies are attempting to adapt their activities and reporting accordingly. 3 major conferences organized by the Catholic Relief Services and the Holy See have focused on these themes. Many of us have savings to carry us through our senior years or plan to leave a legacy of funds for family and friends. Pension plans, mutual fund firms, and even banks are undergoing intense criticism and scrutiny to ensure that the investment products they offer support a just economic transition away from dependence on fossil fuel energy sources and towards sustainable business models that promote healthy environments, practice respect for the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples, and supports equitable opportunities for workers leaving sectors dependent on fossil fuels. We can support part of these conversations by raising questions about where we invest. Movement Laudato Si Movement Canada has prepared a helpful toolkit to walk you through the steps of examining your personal financial assets or that of your parish, diocese, or faith-based institution. It is full of resources to assist with an understanding of Pope Francis' vision of an ecological economy and how individuals and groups can work towards it. Not only should we be thinking about what we pass on to future generations, we should also support the youth of today, listen to their concerns, help them realize their dreams for their own futures. We know that many Fridays throughout the year, young people take to the streets and bring their voices to public officials, demanding policies that ensure that they will thrive in years to come. September is often a month when these rallies and strikes take on additional impetus. What better way to demonstrate our solidarity with young people than to stand by their side during the season of creation? September 23rd is planned to be a day of pivotal action in Canada. Find a Fridays for Future strike near you using this website and bless the youth with your presence. In Toronto, Catholics from Development and Peace and MLSM Canada will join in interfaith contentions and be part of the larger group. Anyone can register their own event if you're in a smaller community or too far away from a major center where there is a larger one happening. It's easy to register, and when the day is done, post pictures back afterwards.
So I just want to return to this question: what kind of world do we want to leave for future generations? And so we just want to, we're just going to hold our seed for a moment of reflection, to think about what seeds we want to plant with our lives, what legacy we'd like to leave. And you're invited during this time of silence just to come up and place your seed somewhere on our garden bed here. So here's stage number six. We've now built this beautiful thick sponge of materials. And only during the first few weeks of planting do you really need to pay attention to watering, and those seeds are starting to germinate. And after that, you don't have to think about watering that much unless you're having some really prolonged dry spells. Because the simplest way is just to stick your hand into this 6 to 8 inches of mulch, and if you feel moisture, you don't have to water. So in a typical season, you might end up watering about 10 times throughout the season. So we developed this sponge. We've fed the soil from the top down instead of the bottom up. Also during this tending phase, you'll pay attention to the seedlings, and as a seedling appears, you'll take more mulch, and you can pack some more mulch around those little seedlings. So you're protecting the base of those seedlings. You're giving them, again, some opportunity to hold moisture in. The other thing with this type of gardening is you do minimal weeding. Instead of pulling weeds, you smother weeds. So again, as you see weeds come up, you'll take some mulch and you'll kind of just stick it on top while those weeds are still small, and those weeds will break down, decompose, become part of this nutrient bed. By making a habit of visiting your garden once or twice a day, you'll learn to listen to the earth and to understand what your soil and your plants might need by being in relationship with it.
The dignity of work is included in Laudato Si in several areas. Laudato Si 124, any approach to an integral ecology, which by definition does not exclude human beings, needs to take account of the value of labor. Laudato Si, if we reflect on the proper relationship between human beings and the world around us, we see the need for a correct understanding of work. If we talk about the relationship between human beings and things, the question arises as to the meaning and purpose of all human activity, together with the awe-filled contemplation of creation, which we find in St. Francis of Assisi. The Christian spiritual tradition has also developed a rich and balanced understanding of the meaning of work. Laudato Si 129. In order to continue providing employment, it is imperative to promote an economy which favors productive diversity and business creativity. For example, there is a great variety of small-scale food production systems which feed the greater part of the world's peoples, using a modest amount of land and producing less waste, be it in small agricultural parcels, in orchards and gardens, hunting and wild harvesting, or local fishing. Civil authorities have the right and duty to adopt clear and firm measures in support of small producers and differentiated production. This past August, Pope Francis's prayer of the month was for small and medium-sized entrepreneurs. Let us pray that small and medium-sized entrepreneurs hard hit by the economic and social crisis may find the necessary means to continue their activity at the service of the communities in which they live. The Pope praises those who, with courage, effort, and sacrifice, invest in life by generating well-being, opportunities, and work. They do not appear on the lists of the richest and most powerful, and despite the difficulties, they create jobs while maintaining their social responsibility. So we're invited now to open our hands and look at them with gratitude for the ability to work with them, for them being instruments of creativity and love. And we take a few seconds to look to them with gratitude and love.
The final stage of our garden is harvest. I harvested this massive tomato today. I'm still smiling about it. This harvest from Star Garden will be shared with communities and families in need. This is the abundance of creation, not to be hoarded or kept to ourselves, but to be shared in rich community. In life, we are not always granted to reap what we plant. As a Chinese proverb says, one generation plants the trees, another gets the shade. To find the reward in the happiness of love given is already in itself harvest. When planting in an organic garden, the harvest comes with the cycle of the seasons and allows us to enjoy the fruits and share them. It's time to share the table, to feast. But first, we will conclude this time of celebration together. Laudato Si. Yet we can once more broaden our vision. We have the freedom needed to limit and direct technology. We can put it at the service of another type of progress, one which is healthier, more human, more social, more integral. What kind of a world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up? This question not only concerns the environment in isolation. The issue cannot be approached piecemeal. We need to see that what is at stake is our own dignity. Leaving an inhabitable planet to future generations is, first and foremost, up to us. The issue is one which dramatically affects us, for it has to do with the ultimate meaning of our earthly sojourn. Now we'll let Agnes introduce this final piece.
So I had a few slides, but I'm not going to, we are close to the 10:30 mark. So what I will do is, I just wanted to mention that as we finish up, early next week, mid next week, you'll receive an email from us, from Star of the North, that will have a PDF of everything that we've spoken tonight. It will also include some resources that you could investigate on your own. A few of those I will invite you to look into the Laudato Si movement as well. Our Canadian chapter has a beautiful website with lots of information. You'll find the Eco Investment Toolkit there. And there's training that happens several times a year for people who are interested in becoming Laudato Si animators. There's a program happening right now, but I believe new people to join is you'll have to think about it for next spring. Now, following this, we will see a small video, the message of His Holiness Pope Francis for today, the World Day of Prayer on Care of Creation.
I want to thank you, Agnes, for bringing all of those important pieces to our attention. The pieces on water, on different movements, on things that are happening that we need to pay more attention to biodiversity and so on. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and for partnering with us this evening.
My pleasure. It's been a joy to be with you.
And a thank you to Maria Angel for preparing the ritual and to Clint, our gardener. And to all of you online and in the house here, thank you so much. We just want to let you know as well that Aurora Living is coming up. Our first weekend is the September 20, well, give me the date. 23rd. Yes, that weekend is our first weekend for the Psalms. And it too is focused on Laudato Si and on living the practical ways of a new way of evangelizing, of living, and of learning to be community again. And we're very excited that we already have 17 people registered. And we have likely 5 more teachers coming on board. So we have a good group of folks. Let your people know about it. We would appreciate your help letting people know about it. We also have videos on demand now, a new initiative from the Star, where you can do your own retreat at home in Spanish, English, or French. And it's online. It'll start in October, I believe, and it goes right through until May or June next year. So we'll have one theme per month with the 3 languages, in the 3 languages. So you can look forward to that. And that wraps it up. We have some harvesting to do and feasting to do here and in the room. And for those of you online, if you want to show yourselves, we'd love to see you and say goodnight.
Thank you, Lucy and Star of the North, for hosting a very beautiful program and to setting us on the path for a beautiful season of creation. Thank you.